podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. When you're ready to launch your next app or want to try a project you hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so take a look at our friends over at Linode. With 200 gigabit private networking, scalable shared block storage, node balancers, and a 40 gigabit public network, all controlled by a brand new API, you've got everything you need to scale up. And for your tasks that need fast computation, such as training machine learning models, they just launched dedicated CPU instances. And they also have a new object storage service to make storing data for your apps even easier. Go to pythonpodcast.com/linode, that's Linode today to get a $20 credit and launch a new server in under a minute. And don't forget to thank them for their continued support of this show. And you listen to this show to learn and stay up to date with the ways that Python is being used, including the latest in machine learning and data analysis. For even more opportunities to meet, listen, and learn from your peers, you don't want to miss out on this year's conference season. We have partnered with organizations such as O'Reilly Media, Corinium Global Intelligence, ODSC, and Data Council. Upcoming events include the Software Architecture Conference, the Strata Data Conference, and PyCon US. Go to pythonpodcast.com/conferences to learn more about these and other events, and take advantage of our partner discounts to save money when you register today. Your host as usual is Tobias Macy, and today I'm interviewing Pascal van Kooten about his Nostalgia project, a nascent framework for taking control of your personal data. So Pascal, can you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi. So my name is Pascal. I'm 30 years old and I'm currently a freelance Python software developer. Before that, I've been a lead data scientist and consultant for 5 years, having worked at over 25 companies. I really love innovation and I've been an active contributor in open source projects, mostly machine learning. So like, for example, I made Shrink. It's a package that uses machine learning to predict which compression to use for your data. And another one is Where Am I, which uses Wi-Fi signals and machine learning to predict where you are. And yeah, I've also spoken at conferences such as EuroPython.
And do you remember how you first got introduced to Python?
Yeah, I started programming using R programming language 7 years ago while studying methods and statistics. And I got an opportunity to work at CITO. It's a Dutch organization that, amongst other things, calibrates high school tests. And they needed a GUI for one of their expert systems. And they knew that I didn't have much programming experience, but it was fine. And, I knew R wouldn't be good for building a GUI. So I asked a mentor of mine what I should use. And even though he used himself PHP, he made a great suggestion for me to use Python. So yeah, soon after I started using it to compete in Kaggle machine learning competitions. And I started using it daily, both professionally and for side projects. So yeah, I've done something like 100 side projects. But Nostalgia is definitely my most ambitious one yet.
And so in terms of the Nostalgia project itself, can you just start by describing a bit about the overall mission that you have for it and describe a bit about what it is?
Yeah, so Nostalgia is like a Python framework, like a lot of repositories. But yeah, so the main mission here is that Nostalgia is pursuing 3 goals. Get the data back in your own hands, ensure privacy and control for you, that is the individual, and allow the user to utilize the data to explore more about themselves, answer questions, and help them achieve personal goals. So very often people say that not tracking is the solution to privacy. So they come up with solutions like DuckDuckGo for browsing, which avoids tracking. But I think that's suboptimal. So I still want to have that data. I want to use it however I want. And at the same time, I acknowledge that it's a very difficult issue and it requires major changes in how we handle data. But I believe we are going in that direction though. And so at this point, Nostalgia is all about obtaining your existing data, keeping it only on your own devices and allowing you to use it.
So you mentioned that one of the things that you're trying to do with it is being able to gain some value of your own personal data that you're already sending off to some of these third-party services. And I'm wondering if you can just describe a bit more about how the overall topic of personal data management came to be a focus for you.
Okay, so it started with wanting to get insights in how I spent money for me, actually. And I realized I wanted to filter on location, but obviously the bank does not provide you that as a filter. So then I realized I should be able to use my GPS data. And I started scraping my Google timeline data for personal use, which has information like you were at home between 9:01 p.m. and 10:05 p.m. And you were driving for the next 35 minutes, for example. So as I further progressed, I became actually obsessed with having access to all my data. And another example was when I was working on multiple projects, I made sure my text editor tracks which files I open. And so aggregating that, I had a very nice overview on which projects I worked at what time, without having to keep track of it manually. So for data that I felt missing, I started to think of ways to have it automatically tracked. And another example would be that I created a Chrome extension as part of Nostalgia that monitors play and pause events on videos in your browser. And so I actually think that I'm the only one with a history of the videos that I've been watching at what time and for how long.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that can be interesting to go back and get a more high-level view of your habits and some of the day-to-day interactions that you're having with your technology and, for instance, as you were saying, with your editor to be able to see what projects you're working on.
Right, yeah, definitely.
And so I know that there are a number of other platforms or systems that you can use for being able to track some of those types of information. And I'm wondering if you can just give a bit of an overview about some of the other tools or systems that you've tried out before building Nostalgia as a way to be able to collect and manage your data and be able to get some of that same types of insights as what you're using Nostalgia for.
Yeah, so actually, as you noticed, I started kind of naturally with like simple scripts here and there. But indeed, at one moment, I started looking at what is around, and I noticed, for example, Timeliner, which is a Go repository, which helps collect data from sources. It was made by the Caddy web server creator, and it actually does a couple of nice things that Nostalgia doesn't do, like deduplication of data, and it's very memory efficient. And another one is PerKeep, which is simply about storing data and making backups. So with the idea that even if like data platforms like Twitter might disappear, you'll still always have your own copy. I don't know. I know there's a lot of apps that try to tackle one particular aspect, like tracking your mood or tracking like a single thing. But yeah, I did not find really one that allows you to track everything, let's say.
And then in terms of the target audience for Nostalgia, I know that initially you started building this for your own purposes, but as you have started to build this out into more of a full-fledged project and release it as open source, what is the sort of target audience of who you think would be able to most benefit from Nostalgia and has the necessary skills to be able to make use of it?
So ideally, I want really to target the end users and that everyone can be using it. But I think that's too early at this point. So at this moment, the beauty of the framework lies indeed in its open source nature, and it's driven by the urge to connect everything and generate insights. And to do this, I believe that developers are actually the perfect group because they always try to optimize stuff. And so initially the target group would be Python developers, though, yeah, probably there will be maybe using Docker will be available for a more generic audience. But yeah, like I mentioned, the end goal should be to get this to as many people as possible and for them to become a natural part of their life and enable them asking questions about their data, basically.
And so beyond the initial use cases that you were mentioning of being able to see what was your travel times at different points and the different projects that you're working on and your editor, what are some of the ways that you're actually using Nostalgia now as you've started to add more capabilities and data sources to it?
Yeah, it's a tough thing. I'll get back to that. But so actually, I have a lot of examples, but let me give you 3. So I had to get a visa in The Hague, and I had that done the year before, and I was wondering how much it cost the year before. Like, I mean, that would be the same price as now, right? So I used Nostalgia to filter my payments in The Hague using my location data. And I immediately found the result. So the other one would be like comparing my heart rate data while I was in a traffic jam. And I noticed my heart rate was higher. And I realized that I was mostly listening to music while driving, but that it actually made me think. And I realized that listening to a podcast, for example, would provide just the right amount of distraction to calm me down. So yeah, that's something I did. And so that's another example that I have. And another example would be that someone posted on LinkedIn an idea for making a startup about cloud deployments and how to make that easier and more generalized. And I remembered reading at some time in the past some article that described a similar idea, but I had no idea how to find it in my web history. But then it occurred to me that I do remember where I was at the time when I read it. I was at the Amsterdam train station. So using Nostalgia, I was able to filter my browsing history being on the station using the location data. And then again, I immediately found it. So, it was rather than searching for a cloud or startup, which did not yield any results. It was actually an article about Dark, a new programming language. So for many, it's not that obvious to think in a cross-source way. And I even find that it's difficult myself. That's because it's very logical that, we currently have no way of executing such queries. So there's no way to think in a cross-source way. But I'm 100% sure that this will be a possibility in the future. And so while it might seem radical now, even in the early days, people also thought Google was not necessary. Like you could just type a URL, right? So yeah, I think there will definitely be good use for, a cross-source querying.
Yeah, there's a quote, I'm probably going to misattribute it, but I believe it was either Bill Gates or one of the heads of IBM at the early days of the internet saying that, search engines weren't really useful. Somebody would just have maybe 5 or 6 sites that they would want to go to, and they would just keep track of those and bookmark them, and that beyond that the internet wouldn't really be that useful. And now with the explosion of the web, it's they were obviously wrong in retrospect, but
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So you've mentioned a few of the different types of data that you're working with and being able to do things like filter based on the location that you are at to be able to pull up an article that you were reading. I'm wondering if you can give a bit of an outline of the number of different data sources that you're able to pull in now, and talk a bit about how Nostalgia is built to be able to correlate across those different data sources.
So at the moment, I just checked it. There's 29 different types of data. So that's indeed from all these different ecosystems. Think like heart rate, location data, calendar, Reddit posts, pretty much anything that I've been personally using, and some others have contributed. Now I also lost where I wanted to go with this. So yeah, so basically what Nostalgia provides when you've combined, when you are having the connections, is that I made this structure, I call it a Nostalgia data frame. It's basically inheriting from a Pandas data frame, but we've added a lot of convenience functions, so you can easily query it by, for example, natural language times, like dates, and just do easily joins across data sources by time, for example. Now another is full text search, like using a dot containing or yes, so a lot of convenience functionality that, as long as you're connecting the source in that particular way, it will have the benefit of everything that we found useful as a community.
And is there some common data format or schema that you're coalescing everything into to be able to join across them, or are you relying on some set of common attributes among those different data sources to be able to correlate, or is it largely just based on time and just seeing what the coincidence of time is across those different data sources?
That's a very, very good question. And that's something that this is actually why I started with Pandas, because I thought it will give me the full flexibility. Like the other option was going immediately for a graph with Neo4j, which I did consider, but I thought let's just start prototyping it with Python. So integration like that is always tough, because on the one hand, you want to make data as structured as possible, so it's easy to connect. But at the same time, you want to have a free schema so that it fits all the data. And currently, Nostalgia offers both. So it is possible to use some of the data interfaces, such as chats, that they require a from, a to, and a timestamp, for example. So indeed, time is definitely a big part of this. And another one is payments, with a to, from, and an amount and a timestamp. So at the same time, many other classes can inherit from the base object that is just a Pandas data frame. And actually, Pandas can deal also with JSON. So it's really up to the source connection, the application, and the user on how to deal with it. So you can either use these common data interfaces, but if you just want to get going with your new type of data, then you can just inherit from the base basically.
And have you looked at all into using some of the capabilities found in the Pandas extension arrays for being able to build out custom data types for being able to do some of this filtering and joining across the different data frames?
No, that's actually new to me. So you should probably post a link so I can look that up. Yeah. So, well, actually to add on to that, I basically also thought that instead of trying to make it very strict, the structure is that after we've actually like connected something like 500 sources and a dozen of applications have been integrated, I think that's when we will see really useful patterns based on actual, existing data. So that's kind of the approach that I think would make sense. But yeah, I'm still learning. And so if there's better ways to do this, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I'll definitely add a link in the show notes, and I actually did an interview with the person who implemented them a little while back, which I'll link to as well. But at a high level, it's a way to be able to add a plugin to Pandas data frames that has custom definition for data types for things. One example being geo data or IP addresses, and then having some custom logic for being able to process those different column types within the Pandas data frame.
That sounds super relevant because I was also thinking about, like these common attributes. If you can define them in like, in one way and then be able to reuse them, that would make a very good fit, I guess.
And then for the storage format for the data that you're using, what are you using to be able to actually keep track of all of it and maintain history across all the different data sources?
Yeah, so it's kind of a custom ETL process in which everything is stored to disk, but using heavy compression. So it's very heavily compressed. Basically, the idea is that it would all be in the memory of one process. But yeah, this is one of the things that could change. I think the Pandas interface is very interesting, so I don't really want to jump ship that quickly and go to a subpar solution yet. But yeah, it's definitely something to think about. And but yeah, basically it's stored as Parquet files using compression.
And what are some of the overall assumptions that you're using to direct the focus of your development and some of the ways that you're thinking about the interaction and user experience design of the overall project? Yeah,
that's a very very good one. So mostly it has been driven by personal ideas, but as I'm seeing that there's more contributors, we're seeing more structure. And well, basically, I think that rather than just thinking about only which apps do we want to add, we are also going to be focusing on making the barrier to entry as low as possible. So there can be many people adding their own source, but also getting quickly to the stage where they have their own data and they can actually start making applications for it. So I try not to have too much assumptions and think about what apps should be created, but they're the ones like, for example, creating the timeline in which you see all your data. That was a very natural one for me to want to have to kind of overview on everything.
And digging more into the timeline in particular, when I was looking through and preparing for this interview, I noticed that it has a UI element to it. So I'm just wondering if you can talk through some of the structure or how you approached building that one. Is it just a web UI that you load up and you have a server process for populating it, or is it more of a desktop application? I'm just curious how you're approaching some of the more user-facing elements of building out the Nostalgia ecosystem.
Yeah, right. So that's definitely a tough one, in which I've struggled between, should we have like a web client, should we have mobile, or even like have use Electron, for example, for making a desktop application. So yeah, there's no definite answer yet on that. The timeline in particular was just like a very small JavaScript library I'm using that just did exactly what I wanted it to, which is have a timeline and indeed feed it with a server process. But this is something that is created in a few days, and I'm actually hoping someone would take that as inspiration and would make like the next version of it, for example. Though I definitely don't think the maximum potential is used there. But yeah, I think having a good core. That's something that I should personally be focusing on. And then I hope the ecosystem, there will be people that are just excited to create applications on top of it, whether it be web, Android, or desktop.
And in terms of bringing more people into the community that you're trying to build around this, I'm wondering if you can just talk a bit about how much attention it's started to gain and any feedback that you've gotten as a result of people starting to experiment with it and try to use it for their own purposes.
Yeah, so I think that the main thing is that as soon as you're having it installed and as soon as have one source loaded, you'll immediately get hooked onto it and want to add more. And basically our goal should be that if someone's source is not there, that it should be as easy for them as possible to be able to add that source. And so I think that this is is really crucial there. I think I forgot part of the question actually.
Just wondering how
Maybe,
much community adoption you've seen and any feedback that you've gotten as a result of people starting to use it.
Yeah, so indeed, I have not had much community adoption because I have not reached out anywhere. So I've mentioned it once in a comment on Reddit, for example. But I plan to, once we have the documentation even better and it's very clear for everyone how to use it, I think that's when we'll try to expose to a larger audience. And I guess then the real things start, how can we make it even easier and stuff like that.
And in terms of using nostalgia for tracking and correlating your personal data, what are some of the drawbacks posed by using that as compared to a managed service that has a lot of investment and time dedicated to it for things such as Google or any of the other personal data services?
Yeah, so it does not offer any guarantees on, your data. It's if your hard disk crashes, then everything is gone with it in that sense. So indeed, in that sense, there's no, it's not creating in that sense data for you. There's basically no backup ideas yet, for example. So that's definitely a drawback. That's definitely something I would compare differently. But at the same time, at least you're sure that you're the only one having access to it. So that's a good thing. It's just it will only be on your local machine. Another drawback is that you don't have perfect integrations with a push of a button. So some sources are much more difficult. So they require some manual work for gathering it. But yeah, the most important is that you do not have to actively record data. So that's one of the main principles. You might have to do something to gather it, but to record it. So in the heat of the moment, you don't have to record data. So yeah, and I guess another downside is that it's really early in the development. So yeah, we really don't have the answers to everything yet, but we're working on it.
And as you have started to build this out from just a few set of scripts that you ran for your own personal purposes into more of a full-fledged project that you're trying to make usable for a broader array of people and make it fairly easy to add new data sources or new visualizations or integrations on top of it, what are some of the most interesting or challenging or unexpected lessons that you've learned in the process?
Well, I think the thing is that it's a big ambition here, and there's so many options, and the more people you talk to, the more ideas they have. So I think this is one of the challenging parts, is that, so many things are possible because it literally concerns all your data. So possibilities are actually endless. But yeah, another thing is that, I try to come up with useful taxonomies, for example. But yeah, I basically gave up on that for now. And I think it should be driven by ecosystem, it kind of grow naturally. And well, another thing is that, you always want to refactor. You always have this urge to, improve stuff. But at the same time, I did a small refactor, which, made me lose part of it, or, basically just wanting to make it available as soon as possible. Then you have to cut some corners. But yeah, so I guess now it's about, getting more requirements, getting more usage, and then we can redesign things. So then we can actually do a refactor. But I don't think that should be done too early.
And one of the things too is that because this is focused on managing people's personal data, in some regards, it's easy as you start to think about what are all the possibilities to end up in a situation where you're just recreating another managed SaaS platform for people to be able to load all their data and integrations into. But at the same time, a big draw of the project as it stands right now is that it's giving giving control to each individual to manage their data on their own systems without having to worry about what other servers or what other services are going to be accessing it. So I imagine that that's something that you'll have to keep in mind as you start to build out more integrations and more capabilities and start to think about how to make it a little bit more robust or resilient.
Yeah, definitely. Indeed. So, I mean, indeed, like, it's really about getting the data back in your own hands. And it's definitely not something that we will consider is to, be like a SaaS that, you have all the data there. I think that would be a really a big disaster. So that's definitely something that we want to avoid. But, indeed, at the same time, it's also something we cannot avoid is the storage and ensuring that everything will be safe. So yeah, it's very, very interesting for us. And the last things are not said about it for sure.
And so what are some of the future directions that you have planned for the project, either in terms of new data sources or new applications to consume the data or just overall updates to the system infrastructure and system design?
So I'm postponing the redesign until we actually get usage. I think it will be fine as long as we don't break any contracts with the user. It should be okay. As for further future, so instead of trying to connect sources myself, I'm trying to more and more post issues on GitHub and see who will pick it up. So another one very interesting topic that we wanted to be tackling is the entity resolution. So for example, you're talking about on Facebook about one person, but that person occurs elsewhere in your data as well. So it would be great if we can do something about connecting the people from one source to another. So it's like cross-source entity resolution, and we'll always keep building on the taxonomy, right? So where I mentioned that we do have some structured interfaces, I think there will be much more work on that. And as we add more duplicate sources, so that's like from different providers, I think this will be cooler and cooler and more useful to everyone basically. And as for the apps, I did create a chatbot on top of it at one moment. So you could ask, for example, how much did I spend in supermarkets last week in Amsterdam, for example, and it would be able to give you an answer, and could do this by just adding a decorator on your class. And it basically would do all this NLP processing. So that's something that was taken out because I had to ship something, right? But I will be definitely working in the future to getting this chatbot part back. Yeah, it was relying on like personal scripts basically. So
yeah, and for some of the entity recognition piece too, that's starting to sound like building a personal knowledge graph, which I'm sure would also be valuable in the context of being able to build connections and build understanding about how your data is working together. So it might be worth looking at. There's a project called ZincBase that I had on the show a while ago for being able to build out knowledge graphs in a fairly iterative fashion. So I'm definitely interested to see some of the directions that Nostalgia goes. And for people who are interested in it, what are some of the types of contributions that would be most valuable to you right now, or some of the types of skill sets or experiences that you're looking to try and bring into the project to help bring it forward?
Yeah, so there's a couple of skill sets we have identified. We even considered like roles. So there's now one other contributor, my friend Nikolai, and so basically he works on one part of mostly considering like things like security, but also on how can we enable people to share their data either with others or with, for example, universities to do studies. So it's very targeted on how you want to use it. So this is like one of the part of roles that's taken now. But any of those topics that I mentioned before is something that we would love to see someone take initiative on. And other than that, the classic, if you want to be an owner of, let's say, like Google data or like one of those sources, that would be very valuable to us as a contributor. And I think it's actually quite fun. I personally do enjoy adding sources, but I should get my hands a bit off of that. And then indeed, like the applications themselves. So if someone would want to take up the timeline, for example, or, wants to get involved on the chatbot, or, maybe if like configuration management is like an application that we could do. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of possibilities, and I just encourage people to come talk to us in either Discord or Slack. and we can see what is a good fit. I guess lastly, there's a lot of need for just people taking the project for use it as a user, and so that means that you're trying to get insights, and you would share like pandas queries. Basically, you could share that with the community. That would be very helpful and very insightful, most likely. So these are just some of the things that come to mind.
All right. Well, are there any other aspects of the Nostalgia project or the ways that you're using it, or some of your thoughts on personal data management that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
I don't know, I'm just thinking of something that one important point still is that actually, why now is a question that we get very often, and for that it's useful to realize that because of GDPR, companies are more and more forced to provide you with your personal data. So it's a very natural moment that such a service will start occurring. Something that will allow you to use your personal data. But let me think. I think that most things were covered. Actually, I don't think we've had a big miss.
Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you or contribute to the project or follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And so with that, I'll move us into the picks. And this week, I'm going to choose the newest Jumanji movie, Jumanji: The Next Level. I watched it recently with my family, and it was hilarious and definitely worth a watch. I've enjoyed all of the Jumanji movies since the original with Robin Williams, which even if you don't watch any of the newer ones, that one is worth watching as well. So if you're looking for something to keep you entertained, definitely give it a try. And so with that, I'll pass it to you, Pascal. Do you have any picks this week?
Well, first of all, I'd like to second that. I mean, I also enjoy the first one, and definitely these two, like they're very the more recent ones. I very much enjoyed them as well. I think comedy is quite underrated in movie critics. It was very entertaining to me. As for my personal pick, I would like to suggest checking out BUP, BUP, and it's a kind of an incremental backing up service. So basically you say something like, I want to have this folder backed up, and if you track it like let's say hourly, you can jump back to any moment in time and see how that file looked at. So it's a very kind of nice way to actually, like, it's an extra way of securing the code you're working on, for example, or to track changes of files basically.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me and explain the work that you're doing with Nostalgia. It's definitely an interesting project and one that I'm going to be keeping an eye on, and I wish you the best of luck with it. So thank you for all of your time and effort on that front, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. You too.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out our other show, the Data Engineering Podcast, at dataengineeringpodcast.com for the latest on modern data management. And visit the site at pythonpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. And if you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts@podcastinit.com with your story. To help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers.